Welcome to the Art of Intelligence, where we decode the future of AI, one story, one use case, and one bold idea at a time. I'm your host, Barlas UJ, inviting you to join me and industry leaders as we explore how artificial intelligence is reshaping our world from the boardroom to the classroom and beyond. Now, whether you're an innovator, a skeptic, or just AI curious, this is your front row seat to the real conversations and practical insights behind the buzzwords. Let's paint a bigger picture together. Today's guest is someone who has figured out how to save the planet one beehive at a time. He is using artificial intelligence to do it. Dr. Noah Wilson-Rich is an evolutionary biologist, entrepreneur, author, and one of the most forward-thinking scientists working at the intersection of nature and technology. He holds a PhD in biology from Tufts University and has covered over 20 peer-reviewed publications. Wrote The Bee, A Natural History, a book that sold over 50,000 copies and been translated into 15 languages. He's the founder of the Best Bees Company, now operating in U.S., 25 cities, and the Urban Bee Lab, a not-for-profit research organization, and has built one of the largest data libraries on bee health in the world. His newest venture, the Biodiversity Lab, is a global environmental consulting firm using AI, environmental DNA, and sensors to help corporations and institutions measure and protect biodiversity. He's collaborated with MIT, Harvard, NASA, National Geographic, and his TED Talks have millions of views. He's also a 2025 recipient of the Lion Ben-Haim Citizenship Award. Dr. Noah Wilson-Rich, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I am stoked to be here.
Fantastic. Noah, it's great that we have you on. I'm so excited. I hear your name everywhere. Bees are starting to become my life. And every time I bring up anything about bees, everyone says, do you know Dr. Noah? So I hope that I get to be put into that category now that I know the Dr. Noah, so life can be good. Before we get started, I'd like to ask you a question. If I walked into your office right now and you had a song going, what would be embarrassing or the most surprising to our listeners today?
Well, it's hard to answer that question honestly after you've built up my introduction so much to then say like some gangster rap or some really like dirty Megan Thee Stallion, Cardi B swearing rap music. But that's the truth. Yeah, I like rap music, and I really appreciate that introduction. By the way, I am just one out of a long line of so many incredible scientists that have really inspired me. Tom Seeley, May Berenbaum are just a couple, and there's just so many people. So it's a real honor. Thank you.
Well, it was a long introduction. I mean, you've obviously worked very hard at it, and it, regardless of what your pedigree is or your bona fides is, you got to respect the honesty and the love of Megan Thee Stallion. I mean, wow, she is awesome all on her own. So you're doing pretty good.
Thank
I
you.
and I, mine is, I'm a Barbie girl in a Barbie world, which, is fantastic when you're driving down the road and you're listening to something and then all of a sudden, I'm a Barbie, breaking your voice as you're doing it, which is, my best version of that. Dr. Noah, we have some questions around some of the things that are going on, and I gave you a really good introduction as to what's going on, but I'd like to know a little bit more about you. What got this started? I mean, little baby Noah did you grow up with like grabbing bees, being a super outdoorsy person? What was it and how did that go?
Not at all. I was born in New York City. I grew up in Connecticut. My mother was a single parent New York City school teacher, and I would play on the rooftops with my cousins at their schools in Manhattan. We would play ball, and they had really big fences that curved inward to catch the balls, which is amazing because we're dozens of stories up. And we would wonder, what's on those other rooftops? Do they have better playgrounds? Like, do they have gardens? Or like, what's going on over there? And as an adult growing up and realized, like, no, they've got nothing. You're actually not even allowed on the rooftop. And realizing that there were hungry people everywhere. Growing up, there's hungry kids. And it's really difficult to understand that as a kid and certainly as an adult. And so wondering, why can't we marry the two? Why can't we have gardens on the roof where families can grow carrots for their kids? Why is that an audacious concept? let me pick that fight. Let me go in there and do it. And so I had amazing mentors. I worked with Becky Rosengaus at Northeastern University. That's where I started learning about the wonderful world of social insects. She worked with termites. And then she suggested I look at bees because termites, I was worried about the pest control industry starting to co-opt our research. I didn't want to die, go to the gates of heaven and have 6 billion termites with their 6 legs crossed and be like, not that guy. I was like, I didn't mean to kill you. I was just studying you. So she said, well, you can work with bees. And I know this guy down the street, Phil Starks, who was my PhD advisor at Tufts and studying how the honeybee immune system worked. That was in 2005 when I started graduate school. 2006, bees started dying off with colony collapse disorder. And May Berenbaum wrote about it in the New York Times in 2007 in an op-ed to share with the general public, like, hey, these bees are vanishing. You need to understand this is a huge problem. Anybody who eats food and breathes air needs pollinators. What's going on? And people would come to me and start asking, you study bees, right? And I was a graduate student, but it helped me understand that there was a big collective movement towards bee health. And I started the Best Bees Company in graduate school as a way to connect people with a way to help the bees at the time. I also started a couple nonprofits with the community, including the Boston Area Beekeepers Association and Classroom Hives. So I'm a serial entrepreneur now, started 5 enterprises, 3 of them nonprofit, 2 for-profit, but all of them on the same mission to improve bee health and advance biodiversity.
Wow, that is a story. I feel like so underlifed. I need to step up my life score to keep up. It's wonderful to see somebody who's dedicated their life, all of their effort, postgraduate, to help the planet as a whole with bees. It's really a calling. It's not something that you could just go to college and be like, oh, I'll be a sales job here, a sales job there. It's really a very focused calling that has an effect on every single person on the planet. You must sleep really well. Like,
I have my worries. I had another mentor in graduate school, Sarah Lewis, who asked me, what keeps you up at night as an interview question? And I said, the world changes so much. It's change is the only constant, like Octavia Butler wrote about in Parable of the Sower, a great book. Change is God. So thinking about invasive species, they're happening all the time. What's the impact of that? Should we worry? Should we take action? What do we do? So the more we know, the more questions we have. And bees are this beautiful universal language. Every culture goes back thousands of years with bees and honey, at least 15,000 years based on cave drawings, 9,000 years based on the cave drawings in Spain even. So we all connect at this deeper DNA level to bees. And I think that's why you and I are drawn to it, and maybe some of our listeners.
yeah, absolutely. Ryan Norton, let's just give him a shout out. When I was living in Idaho, which, as you can tell, I live everywhere. I've moved, just for our listeners who don't know, I've moved every year of my life since I was 18. So you can imagine I'm 50 now. So that's a lot of moving. But when I lived in Idaho, Ryan Norton was someone that is a very good friend of mine, and he moved from Texas to Spokane, right next door to me. And he was wanting something to do with the world. He got caught up in bees, and he invited me over to his 20 acres that he has out there. And we walked out to his 3 beehives that he has. And I was like, oh my God, I'm going to get stung. Like, this is crazy. Why are we getting so close? And he lifted the top up, and I'm standing right over it without any kind of headgear on. And I don't recommend that to anybody, by the way, but it was just amazing to see thousands and thousands and thousands of bees all working together. And I really enjoyed it. And then the second time I saw bees was when I was at my apartment, and there was a swarm of bees hanging on one tree. And it was just thousands, like a gigantic ball of bees. And I remember how close I got. Once again, I don't recommend this to anybody, but I remember how close I got to Ryan's bees. So I got myself 1 inch away from the swarm, and they couldn't have cared less. They were like, whatever, just enjoy. Yes, we're pretty. And that was the end of it. Like, from that point on, I've kind of had bees on the brain, and it's one of the things that I would like to be a Dr. Noah, spend the rest of my life kind of adding that as a value back to the world.
That's amazing. We'll do it. The more you explore, the more we know.
That's true. Well, I know that a lot of people would love to hear us chat. You're a very easy person to talk to, but, one of the reasons people listen to me drone on is because I bring some data to the table. One of the things that I really would like to know, besides of how many times you got stung in your lifetime, because that's that's a thing.
Yeah, I mean,
Do you have a number or
infinity
infinity?
times. I've been stung way more times than I can count. I can tell you a dirty story.
Please, let's get exciting. All right.
So, I've been stung everywhere also,
Ooh, okay.
right? And the worst thing about getting stung on your genitals is
Ooh,
it's
okay.
it's not the actual sting, It's the worrying of, well, now what? Like what
Yeah.
comes next? Like, was it nice knowing you, buddy? Was it
Like, are
is
you
that it?
done?
Is that was
Yeah.
all there was in life? You know? And and luckily I can report back and like, nope, it was all good.
Wow. I couldn't imagine. That just sounds awful.
Yeah.
I've never
There's a
been
data
stung.
set. Speaking of data, one of our clients from the Best Bees Company was a biostatistician at Harvard, and he shared that he saw a data set saying beekeepers live longer lives. And he didn't understand why that was, but it was statistically significant. And he knew at that point that he and his wife needed to get a beehive at their house. And they said right away, and we don't know how to do it. And, that's what the Best Bees Company does. And we really jump started that whole industry of beekeeping services back in 2010. And so now every time I get stung, no matter where on the body, I say that's another day on my life. And to anybody on my teams, I'll say that too, because it's not a pleasant experience, but hey, might just make you healthier. And I will share one of our research papers, speaking of data, about apitherapy, so the ways that bee products help human health. And of the 6 different products that bees produce, venom is the most beneficial to human health, according to all of the traditional Chinese medicine, Eastern approaches, along with the Western empirical data studies. It really shows venom is the biggest benefit. So again, if you get stung by a bee, just tell yourself that's one more day in my life, unless you're anaphylactic. Which might be an
Unless you're anaphylactic, then it's maybe no more days of your life.
right asterisk.
Yeah, asterisks. It's interesting. I watched a YouTube video, and I don't know if this is normal, kosher, whatever, but I saw somebody had a electric panel right in front of a beehive that when
Yeah.
the bees landed on it, they stung it and all of the venom dried underneath it and they pulled it out. And that's how they extracted venom without killing the bees.
Yeah.
Is that a normal way or
But
like we're going to give you electroshock therapy and you're going to give us some of your venom? Like, is that how
listen,
that
we're
works?
talking bugs here. So
Yeah.
what's normal in this? I will say I've seen those devices as well, and I've seen them coming out of China. And so, again, you're thinking about the different medicinal approaches to benefiting human health around the world. And with venom having a long history of traditional Eastern medicine approaches, it's amazing to see that venom can be extracted from bees in a way that doesn't kill them. I don't know if it harms them, but at least they do survive.
I mean, yeah, they do survive. Maybe they'll be in better moods with electric shock therapy. Maybe they'll, speak nicer to their queen or
Yeah.
something.
To be determined.
To be determined. What I really, one of the things that we had talked about earlier about asking questions on was the data foundation. Now, you've built the world's largest bee health data set, and you've been doing this, as you said, since 2005. Now, before you could use AI, you had to build the data. How did you think about creating a data set at scale from hives spread across like 25 cities? And what did that infrastructure look like in the early days?
That's right. So I started the Best Bees Company as a way to raise research funds. And I started a Facebook page while I was a student and I was a bartender at the time. And I would say online, you keep the honey, we keep the data. Anybody want some bees? I'll install the beehive at your house or your business roof, manage it for you. And that research funding from an annual subscription fee for me to visit the beehives and do the beekeeping, collect the data, that would go towards the research. And that first year I thought, if I could get 20 beehives sold, $1,000 a pop, let's say, for unlimited labor for the whole year and get $20,000. I thought that could be enough to start a research lab with. I got a sample size of 20, pretty decent for a guy living in the city in Boston in a
Yeah.
second floor apartment without a car. I'm just taking the city bus and the train, which we lovingly call the T in Boston.
Did you take bees on the bus?
I took bees on the bus,
Whoa.
packages of 10,000 stinging insects. I just put a sheet over them or on the train. When the chair of the biology department at Tufts, Juliet Furman, heard about that, she said to me, you wouldn't believe what researchers are taking on the subway these days. Like, got lab mice, all sorts of like different
Whoa.
research animals just going in between labs. And at least at Tufts, you've got a Boston campus or two of them, the med school and dental school, and the undergrad campus is another different stop, and the vet school is another one. So I'm not saying it's a Tufts thing. Nobody come down on Tufts for this, but this is a way that people and scientists and lab specimens get around. And
Ebola-enabled mice from one side to the other.
yeah, hopefully with some more biosecurity
Yeah,
agents, there's a different protocol in place. But I'll say
I'm
often
sure.
when you're working with organisms that don't have a vertebrate and they're animals, you don't have the same security precautions that, let's say, a vertebrate or human research happens to have. So for that first year, I was taking notes in my lab notebook like a good student. And I was doing, not necessarily sticky notes, but I was figuring it out and just how to collect data in a traditional method. And then I started to grow the company. That first year, I didn't sell 20 hives, I sold 7. That second year, I sold 12. So, adding in the renewals, we were getting up to 20. That third year, I sold 65.
Whoa.
And that was that hockey stick sort of growth where I was like, whoa, this is really growing. And I was also teaching on the adjunct circuit in Boston in addition to bartending. And I had a therapist and I was like, I'm losing my mind. I need employees, but I can't afford to get them. What do I do? And she said, listen, you need to get some interns. There are schools in the
Grad
area.
students.
Yeah, undergrads too. And she said some of these students get academic credit and they're not allowed to get paid. So you're not allowed to feel badly. And that helped me
Love that.
understand, okay, let me start to go to these schools. And I also had a friend in my group of friends who customized software. And he built mom and pop software for restaurants and a bike shop and local places. And I started to realize, okay, I need a database. I need to figure out a way to collect data in a standardized way. And that's how we got started. And so for a few years, it took him to start building that system with it's called FileMaker Pro that now is Claris Systems, and Apple owns them now. So yeah, it took him a few years to kind of come on board there, and that's how we started. And that system is lovingly called Buzz. That's the name of it. And so it's that internal proprietary system. But that's how it got going. And now, of course,
Wow.
there's employees, and he earned his equity, and so it's off to the races there. And now I'm on to the next company. It's pretty exciting.
That's excellent. You're inspiring me, Dr. Noah.
Well,
Someone needs
thank
to
you.
write a book about you.
I appreciate that, but I like to give keynote talks to people and kids about entrepreneurship because I've started my enterprises, all 5 of them, with no money. And you can too. And that's the message here. We have a Facebook page or social media page, and you get your money up front, and you're really honest with people about what you're trying to do. And if you need to figure it out as you go, you do that. But that's how I built these things. And now, at least with Best Bees, it's a multi-million-dollar annual recurring revenue company that's, as you mentioned, in 25 cities, and it's got the largest database of standardized beekeeping data in the world as far as we're
That's
aware,
so
using the
awesome.
central place. And the inevitable vision for this, or as I call it, blockchain for bees, is then to decentralize buzz so that we have what I call smart hives, so that each beehive is a computer and it downloads the information from every other beehive on the network, on the blockchain, we could call
That's
it.
so
Each beehive
awesome.
becomes a node that you can't hack, because as we're thinking, okay, how do we get these research beehives across the world in every single country for biosecurity? Well, you want to make sure it's a secure system and it can't be hacked so that a bad actor can just kill all of the world's pollinators that we rely upon for agriculture. You certainly wouldn't kill all of the species, but this would be a national security threat, just as declines to be health are now. So that's why I think technology, not just AI and machine learning, so these smart hives can adapt to themselves and understand what methods for treating disease or feeding hives or interventions are effective, and really learning the individuality of each beehive. But how do we make sure the data are secure? And so the blockchain technology, where each individual node in a decentralized way are downloading the information of each other node, it becomes a blockchain for nature, for agriculture, for something that isn't just for making money, but a very different approach to this technology that's absolutely needed.
I love that. And while you're doing all of these gathering of data, what exactly are you collecting? Is it weight, temperature, population counts? What goes into that data set?
It's everything. Yeah, everything you can think about, whatever you wonder about. You mentioned Beewise earlier in our conversation. I mean, they're absolutely at the forefront of this. There was another company out of Oslo called Bee Futures that was doing something similar at the individual beehive level, where you could add parts to your typical Langstroth hive. But unfortunately, they're no longer in operation. And so we're left with Beewise that has the ability to record data, and of course temperature, humidity, weight. Those factors have been able to be collected for at least 10, 15 years. Arnia is a company that really pioneered sound recordings in beehives. That was 20
That
years ago
sounds
or so.
interesting.
They're now called AgriSound. So shout out to our friends in the UK running AgriSound. They have now expanded past just the beehive and really more outside of the beehive. This is just like with my career in my new company, the Biodiversity Lab. We've pivoted from bees to biodiversity. Big shocker, big jump here.
Mhm.
Stay with me, everybody. But when we take these technologies from only inside the hive to outside, we're listening to nature and we're using an AI model to match the species, to count species with the frequency of sound that we're hearing. We're not yet at the point where we can talk back to nature, maybe to lure in some native species or to interact or to decode what the language of nature is. We're starting to see this with whales a little bit in Project SETI. But that's what AgriSound has done. They've expanded their sound technology to what's happening in a farm. Where is pollination happening with what species of bees, and what interventions can we make to increase the effectiveness of the pollination with the species match to increase the yield, to help this crop yield increase so the farmer can make more money and it's more efficient. But going back to within the beehive technology, we see with Beewise that they're able to use an AI camera that is collaborating with a robot arm to lift up each frame and then to say what is on each frame. So brood, adults, disease, they can treat for disease using heat, so organic practices against a variety of different mites, even tropy mites that are not yet in the United States. And some estimates say it's going to kill 90% of American beehives that are left. We're
Wow.
already losing 2 out of 3 beehives in some places every year. So it's a really tough battlefield out there for bee health. And these technologies are not only needed now more than ever, but they're also more effective than ever, especially as we're seeing chemical approaches be matched with mites adapting around them and having to use multiple different types of chemical interventions at a level that is low enough to not hurt the bees, but high enough to kill the mites. It's very nuanced there. So we need all these different approaches, and that's why I have so much faith in technologies like AI, machine learning, and these startup companies, especially in a political environment these days where we're just not seeing the levels of support that we used to.
Well, that's great. I mean, that's a lot of information, especially when it comes to the BYs and what they can do and how they're going to do it. What do you think about companies that are looking into this? Like, there's ESG reporting, there's sustainability, things that they have to do if they're doing certain things in the world. Like, what do you say when like Exxon, for example, comes in and says, well, we've got to really put some biodiversity and sustainability into our program. Is that, in your opinion, been lip service? And I don't want to hold your feet to the fire or get anyone in trouble, but the last article I wrote was nature positive, not, just sustainability, and how companies say things like, we're going to do this one day, and it kind of passes it off to the next set of executives that are going to come in. What do you say to companies like that?
Yeah, well, listen, companies are flocking to the Biodiversity Lab for biodiversity consulting. It's been amazing to see. And I'm pulling in other PhDs, other MBAs. We're a team of PhDs and MBAs who are working with companies just like you mentioned, Exxon, big tech. I can't name them. We're under
Of
NDA.
course.
We've been working with MIT, FIFA World Cup, data centers. That's a big one.
Mm,
When we see ESG, it's outdated. It just is. In some places like the United States, it's outlawed. It's banned. Everybody gets it. And we're in a post ESG world where we're coming back to the table and thinking what really matters. What matters, what makes business sense. And my latest TEDx talk, I filmed at MIT this past November. It hasn't yet been released. It's on this topic where we see technology that supports collective environmental action, not just for the planet, but for business bottom lines. It has to make business sense for a company like Exxon to pay attention to biodiversity. We're seeing biodiversity as risk mitigation. When you have an environmental problem that can disrupt a supply chain, that can disrupt a workforce, that can add risk to profits, to Wall Street, because of weather events, because of community pushback we're seeing left and right with data centers, because of environmental issues. What about wildlife? What about, sound and water? How are these going to affect the quality of life? That all has to do with in the environment. And biodiversity solutions come into play if there's a question about data centers releasing heat. Well, how about a green roof, which we know is 40 degrees cooler than its next door gray roof? When there's a sound issue, we're seeing berms come up and tree plantings to block the sound, if that's an issue. Of course, with high-tech data centers, like most of the ones that I work with, sound isn't an issue anymore, or closed-loop water systems. So it all very much relates to risk mitigation, also to allow business projects to go forward hand in hand with the community and politicians, because these projects are getting canceled everywhere. We also see that biodiversity makes business sense because there's something called biophilic design. We see when offices have a view of green space, so not just bees, but of course all the plants and flowers that bees are promoting through pollination, we're seeing 15% fewer sick days from the workforce. We're seeing over 30% more creativity and over 40% more productivity. So it makes business sense as well, all coming back to the financial argument. And these are the types of conversations that we need to be having these days, not just for when an Exxon comes to the Biodiversity Lab, but how do we get everyone to the table? Because biodiversity is the third benefit and final one I'll say here. It's a marketing competitive advantage. When everybody's been competing on the same ESG goals, everybody's got a net zero goal by 2030, looking at carbon emissions and energy use, which is amazing. That's great. But now that everybody's done it, well, we're kind of all the same, right? We all have the same goal, so nobody's standing out. So nature-based solutions, as you've said, that's how people are getting ahead. That's how companies are getting noticed. We have a biodiversity plan. Here's our biodiversity goal. Those plans require taking baseline measures. These actions have to be measurable. So for the Biodiversity Lab, we do environmental consulting. So we'll tell companies what to do. Oftentimes we know they won't do it or they're too busy. We get it. So we also do biodiversity contracting. We're general contractors where we can install sensors. So whether it's, we mentioned AI for nature, we can do not just Poly as one system that's out of the UK with Agrosound for bees, but BioBox is an amazing one that listens to the sound of all nature with Google DeepMind. We also love to work with HaikuBox out of Florida, where you're at today, listening to birds, counting bird species. So that's an example of data that we set a baseline measure, we set a goal going forward. For example, in the UK, they have a policy called biodiversity net gain, where the government says every company has to advance biodiversity by 10%. Companies like, what do we do? How do we do that?
How do we do that here in the United States?
Well, right now with the administration, it doesn't favor that. But when we look to places that do, such as Europe and the UK, and then we look at companies that have a footprint in all of these places, they tend to go with the most strict guidelines as a base policy everywhere on the assumption that this might come here to the United States. Let's say the UK biodiversity net gain rule of increasing biodiversity by 10%. Let's say that comes to the US. Well, we don't want to be caught off, unprepared. And so how do we have one policy across all sites that gets us prepared, gets us that competitive advantage, measures the baseline, sets a goal over time, and then is measuring our progress towards that goal to make sure that we're actually on target? Those are things that we do. And then in addition to consulting and contracting, the Biodiversity Lab will also do the bespoke reporting. So that's really where our PhDs and our MBAs flex, and our events to make sure that these reports come alive in really engaging ways. So one of these tech companies we did in California for Earth Day, we brought goats because they want to look not just at their bees and the smart hives and the really cool things, and not just at the native plants, but they're thinking fire mitigation, because when you just have invasive plants, those are very flammable. And if you have a fire on campus in California, that's very disruptive. That adds risk. So bringing in goats to eat up all of the weeds reduces the fire risk, and it allows for more sunlight to hit the native plants there, which are more tolerant for a lot of these environmental conditions that we're seeing. We did goat yoga at their Earth
No
Day
way. I
event
love goat yoga.
to just make these things come alive and make everybody passionate about what we're doing in a way that you just couldn't do a few years ago.
You're living the dream.
At BeeWise, we've completely redesigned the beehive using artificial intelligence and advanced robotics. It is our responsibility, as the world's most capable species, to protect our most valuable neighbors here on planet Earth. and by that, protect the entire world. Our autonomous beehive, the first of its kind, monitors every bee, providing them with real-time care and support. We are revolutionizing beekeeping and saving billions of bees' lives. To save the bees, we don't need to think outside the box. We need to reinvent the box.
Hey, man, this is, goat yoga? You get to play. I've always wanted a goat farm because I wanted to come out every morning and get those narcoleptic goats where you come out every morning and you go, boo, and they all fall over.
Yeah, I'm telling
And
you.
apparently it doesn't hurt them, so I'm okay with that.
Yeah. But, there's so much we've been doing for years and decades with bees. Classroom Hives, one of my nonprofits here that I love to work with that team. They are installing permanent observation hives behind glass in classrooms. And so when we bring these to the events where people can meet the bees from the campus and say, hey, here's your queen, maybe a name the queen contest. That's at one table. Another table, here's the native plant. Any way that we can engage people, that's what matters. We have to make people feel the data. Even investor meetings where, I invented honey DNA when I was at MIT in 2015. We look at the environmental DNA of plants within honey, the plant DNA, so we know the terroir of our neighborhood. For real estate companies, we've done tasting tables at the back of investor meetings where there's a list of the plant DNA by each jar of honey, and it's taste your asset. It's making the reports, these ESG reports, or these biodiversity, environmental, or just corporate reports, it's making them come alive. It's making your reports edible. And every time we've done this, the investors go crazy for this in a way that gets their enthusiasm up. It makes them engaged about this.
Wow.
You can't do that in ways that just send a PDF on a website. We hope people will get excited, but it's really less measurable to just put it out there. And that's what science helps us do. Measure
Where
the
do you
impact.
find the energy for all this stuff?
That's one of my favorite questions. And I will say my energy and optimism comes from a constant fire of rage within me. I am constantly upset and angry to the point of action for so many issues. A lot of them about the environment, some of them with policy. But, these days, my work spans MAGA, far left, back around. I do tons of field work in Mississippi and Arkansas as much as Virginia and California. And so it's amazing to see everybody come together. We used to say bees are bipartisan, and these days bipartisan is a bad word. Can't say that anymore. So we just say everybody comes together for bees. And you just saw when President Trump hosted the UK delegation for a state dinner that they really highlighted the new White House beehive. Have you seen that? That was
I'll have to check
big
it
in the
out.
news. They customized with artists and designers how to have their beehive look like the White House. And the dessert at that state dinner was all honey themed. So people
Whoa.
always come together no matter who you are, where you are. It's a universal language. And that's why as a scientist, I love working and studying bees because every beehive is a data point with wings. It's so inspiring to help understand it, understand what the bees know. They've been around for 100 million years. And humans have been around for tens of thousands. So we have to be very humble and
Oh, I like that. I would say listen while eating honey, but yeah, I hear what you're saying. How does your family take it? You being all over the world, saving the world. Is a work-life balance good? Is it
Yeah.
challenging?
Yeah, it's been interesting. So I've been with my husband now for 6 years. We're a pandemic love story, and living on Cape Cod, sometimes folks need to find a job. And, he's very smart. He went to Harvard Business School and, doesn't have a hard time finding work, but he has had to travel for that. And we've relocated, and maybe not every year like you have, but for us, we've lived in San Francisco and the Bay Area and Los Angeles and, New England as well, chasing his opportunities. And for me, I've mostly been able to work from home because, for example, with the Best Bees Company in 25 cities, it's really important to understand the differences between Southern California beekeeping and New England beekeeping and everywhere in between. So it's been really helpful to just meet with our team. In 2014, when I was on book tour for the Bee and Natural History with Princeton University Press, I got to meet beekeepers everywhere across the country. And that's how I grew the company without any money. It was really on somebody else's dime there being paid to give those talks. And it's a pleasure to meet people along the way. So anytime I can meet up with family or bring them along is great. But honestly, we're really just chasing the opportunities and trying to drive impact in a measurable way, any way that we can. Again, not just for the planet, but for the business bottom line and also for community health.
Love it. I love it. The latest leap in your research involves extensive network of the interconnected beehives and blockchain technology.
Yeah.
Now, why blockchain specifically? When a lot of people hear blockchain, they think crypto. Help us understand what problem it actually solves in your bee health monitoring architecture.
Yeah, it's great. When people think blockchain and crypto and like, wait, why would you use this technology in a way that's not going to make me money? My father is totally like this. And I get it, right? We're in the United States in a capitalist society. We are ingrained in our heads that technology equals money and success is money. I get it. But let's think about blockchain for nature. People many times have said, well, why would you apply blockchain to bees? What's the incentive? Why would people participate in that? I'm like, well, maybe there are other things that are important too. For example, meet any beekeeper and you will absolutely understand how near and dear to that person their bees are. They care about their bees. That is an incentive. That is a motivation to do whatever you can. It's similar to parenting, where you rear these creatures up, whether they're the bees or kids. You do the best you can and the rest is up to them. Blockchain technology here applied to nature in the format of bees helps incentivize beekeepers to do what they can for the success of their hives and for those around them, because bees are dying around the world from an infectious mite that is spreading. And we know that this mite can be on a flower and then just jump to a bee or to other species of bees. There are costs associated with not applying technology to the health of your bees and to the health of your community. For some people who say, oh, I don't want to do any treatments at all to my bees, well, that's called a mite bomb. That means that your hive is going to infect other hives. We need a network, and we need a network that we can trust so that we know whatever my neighbor's saying, I don't know, they're really treating their bees, or is it not going to matter what I do because I just have this mite bomb next door? So I need to work in a community health approach applied to bees in a way that is decentralized, because as we've seen from the U.S. government back with Obama, 2014, he put forward a presidential memorandum to direct all federal agencies of the government to do everything they could to improve bee health and also to look at monarch butterflies, a critically endangered native pollinator that migrates between Mexico and the United States and Canada and back. President Trump came around, of course, changed all of that, and all research beehives that were part of a program called Pollinator Analysis got dozed out overnight, literally overnight. Our scientific beekeepers had to pick out the beehives from federal properties all across different sites, from courthouses to different department headquarters, and just remove them, just cancel the project. So when we can't rely on that type of a system, just meaning centralized, when somebody's in charge, that's a problem because we still need to improve the health of our bees. Blockchain technology helps build trust in a way that cannot be hacked. When my beehive is a computer and it downloads information from my next door neighbor's beehive in an anonymous way, nothing to do with me, but we start to understand the landscape of bee health in a way that we are incentivized because we want our bees to live. You can kind of think about it in a blockchain for kids sort of way. We don't really yet have like blockchain helmets on our kids in a way that we'd be incentivized to keep them alive. But, I think in some sci-fi book, somebody could write about it. It wouldn't be too far off.
Yeah, it's, there's so many interesting questions that come out of what you just said. One of the ones that I wanted to ask about is the viral mites, but I'm gonna keep that till a little bit later in the show. But is AI making, since this is an AI show, is AI making autonomous decisions based on chain data, or is it more a verification and transparency layer for human decision makers?
Yeah, right now we're seeing less of a network effect of AI's impact on improving bee health and more of an internal on a hive basis. And this is really with BeeWise. They're kind of the only players in the game right now after Bee Futures dropped out and the Best Bees company had a great partnership with them. I was really rooting for them too. And so right now, what BeeWise is doing is they're using AI and machine learning, especially to understand the patterns at the individual hive level, to see the effectiveness of different disease treatments, to understand how those bees are responding to different interventions. I think that's really important, and it's a critical step before we can then network each of these. And of course, BeeWise is able to network them too, but we need to scale them. Right now, they're really predominant in the United States, and I believe some parts of Israel, and maybe a few other countries, but it's at its nascent phase. So they have raised the most money out of any company in this space. I think they're really ones to watch. And I find it just an exciting demo of the possibilities for how AI can
Hmm.
provide us a solution to nature like never before. And this is why we're seeing a lot of residents and corporations and even governments adopting this technology, because we know it's part of the future, and people want to do all that they can, really as a matter of national security.
Yeah, BeeWise is near and dear to my heart. They're fantastic. Elia, one of the founders, I consider him a friend. He is showing me some incredible things, from feeding bees when they're having a hard time to be able to maintain themselves, to being able to stop the varroa mites, which we'll get into in just a second, by heating the honeycombs up just enough to get rid of the mites. It's really amazing what this thing can do. So I love learning everything about BeeWise. Something else, the last portion of what I wanted to talk about is about eDNA. Can you tell us a little bit how eDNA combined with AI is essentially reading the molecule fingerprint of an ecosystem, and what that could look like from a soil or water sample system to an AI-generated biodiversity score?
All right, let's start from the beginning here.
Yes.
Okay, so 2005, right? Just a young PhD student, first year, studying bees. I wanted to understand how their immune system works, and kind of like the evolution of the immune system. So if the queen bee, just kind of like with the human mother, is an infection, can she pass on immune goodies, as my undergraduate advisor Becky Rosengast would call them? So antibodies in the human sense, but in the invertebrate, let's say the bee sense, can the queen bee, if she's exposed to a disease, pass on a benefit to the offspring because she has gone through it already? Can she help the kids at a molecular level there? And then later that first year, bees started dying and disappearing, and that really shifted my whole research question to, well, why are bees dying and what can we do to save them and to help them out? Fast forward 10 more years to when I was at MIT, and I was looking at this map of research beehives that the Best Bees Company had built up across the country. And we could see where bees are thriving and where they're dying, and ask why on a map level with GIS. And so I started a partnership with NASA around then to look at their Earth observation satellites, knowing they have so much data. They're just watching the planet all the time. And I wanted to know, well, what do you see? And here's what we see, kind of boots or wings, bees on the ground. And so we started to overlay our data sets with GIS to understand land use. They had a measure called greenness. So from a satellite, they could see how green an area was, but they didn't necessarily know what it meant. And we could see, based on greenness, well, the outcome, the likelihood. We were working towards a predictive model. Can we predict the health of a beehive a few months out so we can inform and advise a beekeeper on interventions that they could do now to improve the health of their bee? What we did at MIT was we looked at the genomics, we looked at the plant DNA genome within honey samples, understanding that honey is this amazing food that never spoils. They found it with the pharaohs in Egypt thousands of years later. I'd love to get my hands on that honey or some really old honey to look at the plant DNA and recreate ancient gardens. How cool would that be?
That would be pretty cool.
Haven't done that yet. Would love to. So understanding then that the beehives, and this is our next research paper that's currently in review, looking at areas where beehives are doing great. Those are associated with more native plant species. So native plant biodiversity seems to be the leading hypothesis that we have now for what's causing an improvement in bee health. So while varroa mites are killing bees, that's what our research shows, that's the leading killer of bees right now, of many, including climate change, habitat loss, and agricultural chemicals. Varroa mites of the diseases are the pests and pathogens. That's what's killing bees. What seems to save them? Native plant biodiversity. We understand this based on the maps that we've built with NASA, with MIT. And so the best thing that we can do right now, beyond just planting a flower, a native plant, and I joke with my teams all the time, when I die on my gravestone, it'll say, "Here lies Noah, plant a flower." After all of this data, all the technology, all the research, PhD, everything, it's like, go plant a seed. Right? But the next step is people really need to participate. Community science goes a long way. If you're a beekeeper and you have a beehive, connect it to data somehow. And so with our nonprofit Urban Bee Lab, we're starting to build out a way to map all these data layers combined. We've done a ton more research looking at viral DNA, bacterial DNA, fungal DNA from different parts of the beehive and from honey to understand what are all the factors that have to do with bee health. And so we're building this into an AI model so that it becomes a predictive tool. And on our urbanbeelab.org nonprofit website, you can see both a map of the world's pollinator plants based on the honey DNA results, which is very, very cool. You can also see AI for bees. It's like an AI for good. I like to use this term for some folks who are scared of AI, and I encounter so many of them in my work as a consultant for data centers, where we're doing a program called DCs for Bees. It comes out of Ireland, Data Centers for Bees. You can check it out in the Biodiversity Lab.
I love this idea.
And the Urban Bee Lab, we're now deploying this in the United States so that more data centers become a biodiversity hotspot, where we're adding bee homes with AI machine learning technology to data center campuses. And when people think, data centers have a negative impact on community health, we say, well, let's put some bees there and let's just get them as a bioindicator for ecosystem health. We'll see if they're dying off, and that tells us, okay, well, it's a canary in the coal mine. When we're doing all of this work with the public, we now have this tool on our website through our colleagues at Syntex Data, Farron Rucker very well, and his amazing team that they've built out this tool that's now up and running for free for any beekeeper to log in, create an account, enter the health of your beehive, and then get a recommendation. That's a linear language model, an LLM from AI, to give you some ideas and suggestions based on the literature for what interventions that you can take to improve the health of your bees as we start to roll out this predictive model. And as with many AI functions, the more beekeepers that enter their data anonymously, the smarter the tool gets. And that's where we're at now, because these are free ways that anybody can participate. And the more people who do, the more we can understand about all of the data that we've been collecting over the years in my entire decades-long careers in different enterprises, to roll out a way that actually matters, not just for people and not just for the environment, but again, for businesses that have risk associated with bees and biodiversity, and for national security of every country around the world.
Wow. I think you need to get some kind of award for being such a wonderful person. Like, seriously, like, where is there a Nobel Peace Prize for wonderfulness? I think that there should be. You're really taking on a lot and doing a lot for the planet, which I'll just go ahead and thank you for the rest of us. That's pretty awesome.
Well, thank you, but it takes everybody, and that's why I just so appreciate this time talking to you, because hopefully people will listen and they'll take action too and spread the word. And hopefully this TEDx Boston talk will be released soon. I'm excited to be able to share that with folks, to just keep explaining in different ways and how people can get engaged and how AI and technology can help us measure our collective action to help support community action towards improving bee health and advancing biodiversity.
I was going to ask you, I was going to have a last question here, but I'm just going to say one last thing because I think we're a little bit over on time. Varroa mites. Can you just give a brief description of varroa mites, only because, there are people that don't know what it is. And I have my biggest question is, why are varroa mites only affecting bees now? If they've been around for 100,000 years, are varroa mites like a new thing? Did someone create them? Did they just finally crawl out from Noah's Ark? Like, how did that happen?
No, I didn't let the varroa mites on my ark. No. Well, let's say if I were that Noah, I might say, you guys wait. Separately from this question, I'll say everything in nature, every species has a biological role. Whether we understand it or not, everything's doing something. Every organism is taking in resources through feeding, and they're excreting waste, which could be resources for something else. I recently took my mother to Costa Rica, where we learned the pollinator of cacao when we went to a chocolate tour. Do you know what pollinates cacao? Mosquitoes.
No way.
What? Right? It's
you found the only reason why mosquitoes are on the planet.
This is what I'm saying, right? So anytime we're thinking, okay, why does this disease exist? Why do varroa mites exist? Why do mosquitoes? There is a reason, whether we understand it or not, there's a function. And so when we lose that species, this is why biodiversity is so important. We're losing a function on the planet that we cannot get back. It's not just like reducing a workforce when we're minimizing the functions at a company and we can rehire them back. We can't hire them back. So even though we don't understand everything, there's a role being played. And so let's talk about varroa mites here, to your question. Varroa mites are native to Southeast Asia. They've been there with a different species of honeybee, a cousin, and And they've been living in a balance in that area, just like other diseases do. And so diseases often control populations, they keep them in check. And there's kind of a rabbit in the hare evolutionary biology graph that a lot of biology students have seen, that over time there's population booms and busts. And when you mess with that balance, you get one population that can get out of whack, and that can cause environmental damage in other ways. So there is a balance in nature that was then, for varroa mites, knocked off through the global spread that likely had to do with human action. Humans are transporting many different species around the world, often through
Humans.
shipping. So when we're moving bees all around, for example, I believe that in Canada, I don't think they allow bees from the United States, but they like fly them in from New Zealand type of thing. Just
Wow.
like, okay, I don't know if like we see the political boundary in the same way that bees do, but they're probably flying in between, and maybe by shipping them around the world on planes. Or actually, I just had a meeting with some other board members from Urban Bee Lab with some folks in Chile who wanted a research project on how to retrofit airplanes to fit more Chilean honeybees to ship them to Canada. So
Mm.
human creativity causes some problems. In graduate school, anytime we would read about how humans brought a species to a new place, we would think, oh my God, this is not going to go well, right? So 1987 is when varroa mites came to the United States. There's a really fun animated map from my first TED Talk in TEDx Boston 2012. Everybody check that one out. It was a really interesting graph to show over about 100 years the spread. Each country went from a white color to a red color along with the year for when varroa mites came. They're essentially everywhere now. Australia was the most recent country to be hit about 5 years ago or so. They knew it was
Mm.
coming, and it's been terrible. They've been burning beehives for hundreds of kilometers away from an infected hive, and then they realized
Wow.
it's like, oh, that wasn't affected. Sorry, all beekeepers. Like we shouldn't have burned your hives, type of thing. So it's a really
Oops.
big problem because varroa mites are a vector of disease. Like many ticks, they will transmit bacteria and viruses along with them. They're saprophytic, so they feed on blood, or in the case here with varroa mites, the hemolymph of the bees, the bee blood. And the problem has become bad as the time has passed. The populations are booming. There really are very few effective defenses, and those are only being used on managed beehives. You then have the wild hives, so it's just out there. The cat's out of the bag here. And just as a mite and as humans are adding artificial approaches, like synthetic chemicals, that's allowing the mites to evolve and adapt against them. And so there's also been this unfortunate approach of resistance that's been happening with mites, and it's become really bad. So that's what's caused the current situation that, didn't happen, many thousands of years ago. Really because of human activity, whether inadvertent or, doing our best. But the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And
It
even
always
with,
starts with humans.
yeah, and the plant situation here, when honeybees are not native to the United States and to North America and to any of the Americas, but many of the plants that we rely upon here in the agricultural setting are not either. So everything is just very out of balance, and it's a very brave new world since post-World War II industrialization of our agricultural system.
Dr. Noah, let me thank you for your time. Thank you for our listeners that are getting to learn all this valuable knowledge. And I hope to collaborate with you in the future. And whatever we can do to save the world, we will do.
Anytime. And check us out at the biodiversitylab.com or online on socials, the Biodiversity Lab and Urban Bee Lab. We just love answering questions, connecting with people, reading articles, any way people want to engage, don't hesitate. And thank you for your time. This was a great conversation. It flew by.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Every conversation we have on this show is a brushstroke. The bigger picture takes time, but it's taking shape. I'm Barlos UJ. Thanks for sitting with us on this one. If today's episode sparks something, share it, argue about it, build on it. That's the whole point. Until next time, stay curious, stay critical.